Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to PMO Mindset, Become Fulfilled in Your Work. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I am a program assistant at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit that's building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. And so, as you will see in the chat in a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So definitely make sure to check out those links and resources in the chat. And then just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, let us know where you are dialing in from in the chat. We always love to connect. And then second, we are going to open up for live Q&A at the event. So at the end of the event. So please make sure to submit your questions for us in that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. And we'll try our best to get to all of them. And of course, none of what we do could be possible at the center without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, BMO, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, Microsoft Entrepreneurship for Positive Impact, BPM, and HubSpot for Startups. We are humbled by their contributions and hope you are grateful too. And so before we get started, we always like to launch just a couple polls to step back and see how everyone in the room is doing today. This first one is going to ask, how are you feeling? Fearful, anxious, surviving, or optimistic? And I'll give it just a few moments for people to submit a response here. Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end this poll, share these results. Looks like optimism is in the lead. We always love to see that, but definitely have feelings of surviving and anxiety. So hopefully some of our conversation today will help address some of those feelings. So I'll stop sharing this poll and launch that second poll. What is keeping you up at night? Finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot, team, or surviving? And this one just tells us a little bit more about your current entrepreneurial needs so we can continue to provide meaningful programming to all of you. Awesome. We got folks from Texas, New Mexico, Connecticut, Maryland, Virginia, Jamaica, Alabama, Illinois, North Carolina, Virginia, California. Welcome, welcome, everyone. So great to have you all here with us today. All right, I'm going to end this poll and share these results. All right, it looks like finance taking the lead, but we got needs all across the board. So thank you for sharing, and we will take this into account for future programming. Going to stop sharing this poll, and without any further delay, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to our special guest, LaJuana, the PMO CEO, Chambers Lawson, founder and CEO at Taxic Growth Strategies. LaJuana, it is such a pleasure to have you here with us today. I'm super excited for this conversation, and just thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm literally jumping out of my skin right now. I see family, friends in chat. I mean, this is great. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Oh, awesome. That's so great. And just before we jump into the conversation, can you maybe just give like 30 seconds on like who you are?
Yes, of course. So most people know me from Taxic Growth Strategies, which is my for-profit business that's based here in San Antonio, Texas. We are a global company. We specialize in grant and proposal writing, project management training, and impact investment strategy. We've got a portfolio of government contracts, and we help a ton of nonprofit organizations, no matter what size they are, in putting together and building strong boards and going after those contract or grant opportunities that can help them grow sustainably and be a force for good in their communities.
Awesome. Love it. And super relevant to a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So let's jump right in. So you have a book, Master Grant Writing, a Project Manager's Guide. And in that book, you offer a definition of project management as the art of coordinating resources and directing cross-functional teams so the components of work performed by each team produce frequent value to the customers with a stake in the project. And so, what then is the role of project management office, PMO? And can you maybe describe what the PMO mindset looks like and how it impacts the way you work with your team at Taxic Growth Strategies and some of the key factors that contribute to success that when you adopt that PMO mindset?
Michelle, it's such an important conversation and it's timely because a lot of times people think of project management offices as just being consultants, right? And consultants tend to be looked at as, someone that you hire when you have resources. We looked
Or
at consultants as being, it's a luxury to have a consultant. In reality, though, what happens is, especially for our entrepreneurs on the line who are very familiar with this, we hire people to do a job that they may or may not have all of the tools, the resources, the Rolodex, the political savviness, the technologies to be able to do, right? And most of the time when we look at a project management office, we look to a project management office to really save us time, save us risk, save us money, and save us reputation, right? And we want to be always in the position as business owners to be able to create value. We want to create frequent value for not only ourselves and our business, but also our clientele. And the project management office is really there to help accelerate that. So you have different types of project management offices. A lot of them reside within the company or within the organization themselves. Very few project management offices exist outside of the company or outside of the department that is actually looking for that specific specialized support, right? So you have, supportive PMOs that do basic consultation type of things. They have templates, if you need a Gantt chart or if you need a risk register, you need an issue log, you're trying to put together a steering committee for your change control board. You might not know who needs to sit on the change control board, right? Especially if you have a nonprofit that is sort of publicly facing, where they may have, government grants. They may have a mix of philanthropic and public and private funding. So the governance of that looks a lot different than, say, a healthcare organization, right? So you might need to go to a PMO to figure out, okay, have you worked with organizations of this type of magnitude before? And what types of things, what type of best practices worked for that particular organization? So you have those supportive PMOs that really provide the lessons learned from previous projects, right? You have the controlling PMOs who also kind of come in and support on the governance and compliance side of the house. So you'll see a lot of times, especially with, government contracts, these government entities will have specific organizations or specific people that they prefer to work with for certain types of scopes of work, right? So certain types of contracts that have a specialized, scope are going to require a type of expertise that maybe, one institution that's had that experience or one particular senior executive has had that type of experience before, and the government entity may, they may award you the contract. Your business might get the contract to perform that scope of work with a contingency that you work with a consultant. So you'll see PMOs, controlling PMOs, really come into that context for governance, right? Conforming to governance requirements and standards. The other type of PMO is the directive PMO, and the directive PMO tends to take control of projects entirely. So they will manage the project in the absence normally of a project manager that's on staff. So this is where you start to see project management offices can sometimes blur the lines, we like to say, between a consulting stakeholder group versus a contractor, right? The consultant is not supposed to be in the capacity to do both. But unfortunately, especially nowadays with all the uncertainty and, the lack of definition for a lot of our projects that are ongoing right now that are not supposed to be ongoing, you'll see that a lot of the consulting firms are the consulting PMOs, especially like Tacit Growth Strategies. We end up taking on the role of not only advising and overseeing the work, but also doing the work. So you end up sort of blurring the line between consultant and contractor pretty easily there. Get yourself in trouble. When you talk about, the PMO mindset, what I like to think of in terms of the mindset is thinking about, change management and thinking about agile. When you look at the environment in which most of our businesses are operating nowadays, our projects are naturally functioning within highly rapidly changing environments and highly uncertain, environments. Because of the, uncertainties, it's very hard for a lot of our business owners and a lot of our entrepreneurs, right, our employees at the businesses, it's hard for us to properly scope and define the work that absolutely needs to be done versus the work that would be considered a nice to have, right? And so it's really important to have, a PMO or some sort of consultant to kind of come in and help clarify. What I like to say is everything can't be urgent, right? And some things have to be prioritized. It's very easy for you to, especially when you're, a consultant, it's very easy for you to want to take on everything and do everything all at once. But you have to be a self-care advocate, right? Because it's impossible. It's nearly impossible to be agile and to be an effective project leader if you're not getting your rest, if you don't have mental clarity, right? If you don't have an entrepreneurial spirit, where of course everybody wants to be the chief, but you need to be the advocate for the Indians, right? The chief versus the Indians. We need to have those types of leaders who understand that absent your entrepreneurs, you as an entrepreneur are not going to be successful, right? Because there's healthy boundaries that have to come into place and discernment that has to come into place. And you alone will not be the right fit for all of the work that comes to your company or all of the work that presents itself as an opportunity for your company. You might not be the right fit to be the one to perform it. So you have to be savvy and you have to be growth and value oriented. And in being being that way, you have to be able to incorporate that tacit knowledge, right? Which is a lot of what we do here at Tacit Growth Strategies. We like to incorporate that tacit knowledge to make sure that we're always working together to troubleshoot and right size fit those possibilities so that we're an inclusive and sustainable driving force for good.
I love that. Love that. And like it really just underlines the need of like understanding not only like the needs of your business, but like clearly defining those roles and really doing the work to understand who is in a position to kind of fill those roles. I think a lot of what you kind of mentioned towards the end there really plays into ethical decision making. And so in your line of work, ethical decision making is obviously essential and challenging, largely due to the complex nature of the work of the nonprofit and for-profit businesses that you support. And so with this PMO mindset, how should entrepreneurs navigate ethical dilemmas and the long-term impact they can have on their business and the community's trust in the business and leadership?
This is such an important and timely question. I like to think of what we say here at Tacit Growth Strategies is that success belongs to a team, right? And part of thinking about making decisions with ethics first and not, oh, that's right, we should probably have thought about that before we decided to do this. Part of that is looking at your, what type of tactics do you have in place? One of the tactics that we have and that we highly value here at Tacit Growth Strategies is stand-ups, right? So we have stand-ups. And what we refer to, stand-ups are what we refer to in Agile as like a 10 to 15 minute team facilitated meeting where you are really there to discover what problems you all have as individuals and as a collective, not there to solve the problem, right? We're just here to find out what those problems are. And what we like to do in those contexts is we like to talk about those ethical, issues as they come because they're going to arise naturally throughout the life cycle of our projects, right? So navigating those ethical dilemmas really boils down to who we have involved at the sponsorship level for our projects. The question always arises, where's the budget? Where's the money coming from? you know and part of the issue is a lot of times, especially what we see with our clientele, is that they go to the same sort of funders, the same sponsors, to help support their projects, to fund their projects, fund their businesses. And what ends up happening is they end up seeing status quo instead of seeing the change that they espouse, right? They talk about wanting to be inclusive. They talk about wanting to do good for the majority with the majority, right? No progress for us without us type of situation. However, they don't put their money where their mouth is. And the reason why is because when you compare that funding in comparison to what you would probably get, from a crowd fund or something that's not as formal, something not as traditional, conventional, you're talking about smaller dollar amounts, right? And it's hard to then balance or shift the balance of power and influence in that type of context. And so because it's hard, a lot of people end up just not addressing that at all. That's why, again, you need to get yourself a PMO, okay? One of the things that we pride ourselves on, and this is one of the things I was able to do actually for our first African-American Community Archive and Museum here in San Antonio, was we mixed our funding sources so that we could intentionally balance power, influence, and incorporate what the community that we served really wanted to see, right? You can do this on the nonprofit and for-profit business sides, but you have to, again, think about this from a tactical standpoint. And using project management, the tactical standpoint looks like, going through each of the stages of your life cycles, right? So every project is going to have a life cycle. And normally, for us in project management, we've standardized the life cycle with 5 stages. So you're always going to start with initiation or ideation, where you conceptualize what it is that you want to do, what problem you want to solve. Then you go into planning. So then you start to think about, who do we need to hire in order to get this work done? How much is it going to cost for us to get it done? How much is it going to cost for us up front? How much is it going to cost for us throughout? And how much is it going to cost for us to properly make sure that this is closed? When we think about the closing of the project, we have to think about insurances, and we have to think about bonding, and all the types of things that come into play when you're doing the type of work that's complex, but then also may carry a lot of legal requirements. So even after the project is done, for a lot of, especially in the social services, there's going to be a lot of aftercare. There's going to be records that need to be accessible and maintained. So there's going to be costs associated with your project even after it's done, because there's going to need, it may be state law that you have certain records for 4 years, or you might have state law, enforced that you have a 7-year, retention requirement. So it just depends on your type of business and the type of projects. But those are the types of things that you have to think about at the onset of the project when you're in planning. The next phase is execution or implementation. That's the most expensive phase, right? It's the most expensive in terms of budget, and time, because this is where the time performance kicks in. The next phase is controlling, or monitoring and evaluation. And monitoring and evaluation is ideally where a lot of your consultants come into play, right? The consultants kind of come in at that point to help you from an independent evaluation standpoint determine whether you're doing what you said you were going to do. Mm-hmm. Are you spending for the amount of money that you're spending? Are you retaining the value that you said that you've earned, right? So that's when the earned value analysis starts to kick in, and we start to determine what is the present value of the project, and does it hold weight with its net present value? Once we look in the future, the money that we spent today, is it going to justify the value of the project at that point in time in the future? So we look at, evaluation is when you start to have those types of conversations around, cost benefit analysis at that point in time, if you want to determine if you want to keep the project going, or if you want to leverage it for something else, right? Or if you're looking to add on and, that those types of conversations come into play at the evaluation point. And then finally, you get to the last phase of the life cycle, which is closing. And again, like we said before, you've got to be thinking specifically about, upkeep and retention. So if you have a project where, which especially your, public facing project, where you are required to deliver a service to individual people, it is safe for you then to assume that you're going to have some type of retention, right? That needs to be put into place. Those people will need to be able to access that information that they shared with you at some point, and they may even have a requirement for you to destroy that information at some point in time, right? And also give them receipt of that destruction. So those are the types of things that you would be considering, throughout the life cycle of your projects. Now, some of the risk mitigation strategies that you want to consider at the onset. These are like my top three. I have three. So I'm gonna give you my top three. These are three things you can start to implement today.
Love it.
Again, these are risk mitigation strategies that you can implement early on to reduce the likelihood of damage to the credibility of your business. Okay. First thing here, pay attention to your procurement and contract types. You want to be able to achieve flexibility in how you perform and deliver value to your customer over the life cycle of your project or your scope of work, right? Work with who wants to work with you. I tell people all the time, you have to spend the time developing relationships with buyers and procurement leaders and department heads, because those are the people, when you go in and get your products or your services procured as a business owner, those are the individuals that you're going to be working with, consistently. So these are the folks that you want to spend time with, because you want to be able to make sure that you have a working, a good flow of communication, but you also have some trust. The worst thing that you can do is put yourself in a situation where you're working with an organization or a department head who inherently does not trust you or the work that you do. They don't trust the value that you provide. They don't trust you. They don't trust your company. You don't want to put yourself in that position. Work with who wants to work with you. Okay. You want to talk with them about the nuances and the way that they procure products and services at their organization. Not everyone's going to do it the same, but then also some of your procurement leaders, we've got several great examples here in San Antonio, they will do what they need to do to procure you on the terms that make the most sense for your business, and that, of course, align with their policies and procedures at that organization, right? But you need to be able to know that you can negotiate the terms. And a lot of times our business owners don't understand that they can negotiate those procurement terms, those contract terms. Think about the contract type. If you come to any one of my, trainings, I will teach you the difference between, firm fixed price contract and what does that do for your business, a cost reimbursable contract type. I will teach you about these things so that you understand what works best for your company or your nonprofit, and how you'll be able to, explore these things, have this conversation before you have any legally binding, contracts. Okay. The number two thing here, focus on delivering small, bite-sized pieces of value well and frequently. If you take on more than you can handle, or you overcommit, or you overpromise, you're going to stretch your team. You threaten burnout that could ruin not only yourself, but also your business credit. It could ruin your reputation as a business owner. It could lead to irreparable and preventable harm to people that have trusted you with their career, their quality of life, and it can have a ripple effect in your community. We saw that here firsthand in San Antonio. We lost over 40% of our businesses. We saw shut down here in San Antonio due to COVID. Throughout the nation, in the United States, we saw, due to COVID, what was it? I think the number was closer to 36% of our small businesses across the nation that's shut down. This is what is so very important. We have to be able to decompose the work, especially in highly uncertain environments. You need to decompose the work that needs to be done. You need to use those Gantt charts and I'll give you Gantt chart copies if you need it. I got a lot of different versions for you. Use those Gantt charts. Use your work breakdown structures, right? The WBS. Use those work breakdown structures so that you are very clear and you're able to exercise more control over how you and your team deliver these fixed price, hopefully, micro deliverables, right? These are increments of work. These increments of work need to be delivered over the life cycle of your project, yes, but you need to be clear and exercise control over how frequent, and for how much, okay? The last point here that I have is number 3, which is collaboration. And collaboration tends to be one of our favorite mitigation strategies for risk, right? We want to share in it most of the time. So you want to be able to share in the spoils and the opportunities as business owners. One of the things that I love and that I've been able to do for the past 3 years, and I think I saw some of our African-American Chamber of Commerce folks in the chat. I've been the procurement chair for the African-American Chamber of Commerce here. And I've been, of course, a director of the board for a few years. And so what I like to do is I like to share solicitations, contract opportunities, and I do it pretty much every day. I share it not only to our members of the chamber, but also our community at large, because I want to build that sense of community, right? It's a way for me not only to keep up with everyone and their businesses, but it's also a way for me to share my company's capability statement, right? When you think about your own capabilities as a company, as you grow and your team is constantly growing, right? Hopefully we're investing at least a day, every day, a few minutes every day, to go and learn something different, all that. It helps us to increase our business valuation, right? It helps us to increase our capabilities as a team. Once we're doing that, we're able to, share that with other business owners, right? Great piece of advice. Thank you so much. Now, a great example. Back in 2020, if you would have come to me and said, "Hey, I want to find a place that I can purchase for my business," I wouldn't have been able to help you, right? Now that I'm a commercial realtor, I can help you with that, right? I can find you a place to invest in. I can find you a place to lease, but you wouldn't have known that if we weren't communicating, if we weren't collaborating and sharing in the spoils and in the opportunities. So that's the easiest way to get yourself, keep yourself relevant and stay on top of your business and stay on top of your other businesses that you need to support. You all are successful because of one another, not despite.
Yeah. I love this. And I think so much of what you're talking about here really is strategic planning, which is so often seen as a big picture activity, but it matters on a small scale too. So what are some ways that strategic planning can play a role in achieving business objectives? And, as a project management office founder and consultant, what tools or methodologies or frameworks do you find most effective for strategic planning with that PMO mindset, and especially in terms of adapting them to kind of different business scenarios?
I actually talk about some of these things that I'm going to share with you. I talk about it in my book, Master Grant Writing, Project Manager's Guide. I know, right? Shameless plug, y'all. Got to put your products out there. One of the things that I learned when I was serving as president and chair of the board for the San Antonio African American Community Archive and Museum, SACAM is what we affectionately call it. One of the things that we did was during our strategic planning sessions, we came up with this idea of essentially putting together a very simple Excel, or if you have Google Sheets, a very simple workbook, right? It had a tab for each of our functional areas. So we had our functional areas within the organization based on our board committees. So we had research, we had membership or stewardship, we had fundraising, we had events, we had programs, and then we had our volunteer core, which was affectionately known as the Friends. And each tab had their own opportunity to sort of plug in SMART goals and objectives, but they were on each tab. We made sure that there was the overall sort of organizational key performance area that they would fall into, right? The associated key performance indicators that they would, be contriving their SMART goals and objectives around. And then we had each tab had a place for everyone to, to not only communicate and leave comments, but also make sure that, they didn't overlap or conflict with other functional areas. And so what we would do is when we came to strategic planning, this was a homework exercise before we came to the strategic planning session. When we came together, the board, as a board, we had already approved or edited. We never said denied. We said approved or edited the goals and the objectives that those functional leaders, had placed into their tabs. So that way we could make sure that it was aligned strategically to the goals and objectives of our organization. I think that was one of the more palpable and effective strategic planning, tactics that we had in place. That really, once we had that down, that was sort of the document that everyone could refer to, every day that they came into work, right? We eventually were able to hire staff, and that was because I put together the staffing plan, and I said, you know what, this is what we're going to do, y'all. Folks didn't want to do it. They didn't want to pay for the folks to do the work. They thought we could just live off of my students for the rest of times. I said, I'm not going to exploit my kids. I'm not exploiting my students.
No.
So, we eventually hired staff, right? And when those staff members were able to come in, we were able to, with the staff and the board, really look. It was a lot of sites. There's oversight, there's insight, there's, all sorts of sites we were able to provide because of that simple workbook. So I think that was one of the frameworks and methodologies. It was a tool that was most effective for us in that context. I talk about other ones in my book that might work better in different environments. But if you're working in sort of an organization where you don't have a lot of bureaucracy and you don't have a lot of, red tape, then that might be something that may add value to you because you've got the opportunity to really talk. Your staff can really talk with your board of directors, right? But if you have an environment where the board's not really involved like that, then you could tweak that tool and really just use that from a departmental standpoint. Before we went live, Michelle and I were talking about, sort of the anatomy of project management, right? Understanding that project management, when we think of project management, we're thinking really in three senses. We're thinking from a perspective of projects, which are at the base level of our pyramid. We're thinking about programs, and then we're thinking about the portfolio or the enterprise, the organization overall, right? Projects then lead into programs then lead into portfolios, right? And so if I'm managing multiple projects, I'm a program manager. If I am managing just one project, I am a project manager. If I am managing multiple programs, I am a portfolio manager. So we were talking about that before. So this tool could work in any of those contexts, but you would just want it to be the next rung up instead of it being an enterprise-wide solution. Depending on the organizational, the structure of your organization, you would want it to possibly be on a departmental or functional level between functions. The only other thing I would share is that you want to be, one of the things we also talk about in the book that's very relevant to strategic planning and decision making as it relates to what projects to select versus what not to select. You have to be aware of the seat that you're sitting in and the perspective that you have in that seat, right? One of the clients that I worked with when I was specifically writing this book, she was very risk tolerant. She loved to take on risk, loved to take on new projects, and her board was very risk averse, right? They had very extremely unrealistic expectations of rewards. They didn't want to properly account for the risk, so their rewards were way inflated, right?
Yeah.
You want to make sure, especially as an entrepreneur, dealing with your clients, dealing with your team members, you want to make sure that you're able to communicate in very realistic and sometimes conservative, depending on the audience, right? in those terms. Because what you end up doing from a strategic planning session is you end up shooting so far for the stars or for the moon, you get out of the planet, right? You shoot so far that the vision becomes cloudy.
Mm-hmm.
And the worst thing that can happen is the vision be so far out of sight that no one can really feel like they belong to it, and no one can really feel like they could take ownership of it, right? It's just too abstract for them. That's the worst thing that you can do. You want to make sure that you have a handle. I'm not asking you to be a project management expert, right? What I'm asking you is to value project management as a lexicon enough to say to yourself, you know what, I want to follow up with LJ and her team over there at Tacit Growth Strategies to see what we need to, what do we need to do to work with them and really have them help us out here, right? I want you to place the value on the service, because the service itself is what's going to help clarify the vision. Once you start to do, I'm going to do taxes for myself, I'm going to do this for myself, I'm going to do that. Once you start to add on to your plate, you're going to start swerving, right? You were in your lane, you were driving straight. Now all of a sudden you say, oh, I can do this, I can do this, okay. Now we're doing this. Stay clear to the purpose. Make sure that you revisit your mission and your vision statements as a team often. Make sure that your teams have their own mission and vision, right? One thing I noticed with a lot of our more successful clients is their team members have their own mission and vision statements that's separate from the organizations, and it's something that they can recite without even looking at it. That's what we're talking about here. And the team can be small. People don't realize we're talking sometimes 3 people. It could be 3 people, it could be 5 people, it could be 7. I mean, the team is not going to be a ton of people, naturally, because once you start to add to that number, that's when things, you get too many contributions and the focus is kind of lost. Keep it realistic, but also keep it real. And that is how I think for us as entrepreneurs and our intrapreneurs, that is how we're able to ensure that we're constantly creating value, not only for ourselves and for our clients. And that ultimately is what helps us be fulfilled in our work.
Mm-hmm. Love it. And I think this is just so important as we're kind of thinking long term for the business and kind of what those goals look like. So, resilience is crucial when it comes to sustainability for the business long term. And so, how can entrepreneurs effectively build resilience into their everyday processes and company culture? And are there kind of practical techniques that, for developing resilience at the individual and team levels?
I think the most practical technique that I've recently seen practice here at Tacit, as it relates to just being resilient, is we have fully embraced Agile, not only as a culture, but also as our soul, right? It's in our soul at this point. It's not a conversation anymore. And so with that being said, what that looks like day to day is we're not worried so much about documentation, right? We end up having meetings that we schedule, and we spend more time at the meeting than we plan. And yes, it messes us up on the billables sometimes. But when you have team members that understand that that's part of the process, that's what sacrifice looks like. I'd like to say, when you have a team that doesn't fear sacrifice, right? None of us fear sacrifice. We prioritize and actually prefer spending more time with our individuals and our ideas than we do with processes and procedures and documentation. That's one of the top Agile values. That's actually, I think, the first Agile value, right? Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. There it is. That is, when we think about having a project focused work environment, which is what we very much are, and always having the challenge of competing demands on our time, having to respond in rapidly changing environments. That is the culture. Agile is that culture that not only gives us, like we said, the soul, but also the competitive advantage, right? Because people remember how they feel. when they meet us. They remember how they feel when they talk to us.
Mhm.
They remember how it was when we did the extra thing that we didn't need to do before we even got the contract. They remember that, and we pride ourselves on being able to do that. I think back when I was um, president and chair of the board for the Alamo Project Management Institute here. That was one of the things that I greatly appreciated about Agile when I was serving in that capacity, because I really wasn't familiar with Agile as a project management, as a culture. I don't even call it a technique, because it's really not a technique. It's way beyond. It's a culture, right? It's not a framework. It's literally, we're beyond framing, because we have principles, right? So we have values, we have principles. It's a culture. It is very much a culture, right? Servant leadership is what it is. Um, you know, Teams and empowering your teams. That's what it is. They called me an honorary agilist when I was there, because I don't have my agile certification, but they always tell me, you don't need it. Don't worry about it. Right. One of the things I think, and we talked about this before too, I think for us, really embracing agile the way that we have makes the most sense for us, because it makes the most sense for our clients. Our clients are mostly all nonprofit, right? And a lot of folks, as we saw with our poll, a lot of us are concerned most right now about our finances, our financial positions. With Agile, especially in the nonprofit context, you can gain higher visibility because of your embrace of Agile and its principles. So you're worried, if you're not so worried about your processes and your procedures, and you're able to go and really establish those relationships and really build and deepen those relationships, you know you're carving out your market share, right? You're doing something that's not necessarily um, normal. You're attracting and you're leveraging your funding uh, for greater fund diversification, because you're becoming more of an institution in your community. You're spending the time that is what's expected of an institution, right? Institutions are not valuable simply because of the products that they produce. It's because of the culture that they embody. It's because of the values that they espouse and that people can feel and they can recite. We got a whole grocery store out here in Texas that's dominating, the country, the state in the country right now, simply because when you walk into that institution, you walk into that store, you know what their values are. They've got it plastered all over the products. They've got it all over their walls. So that type of institutional mentality and mindset, you see a lot of that. We teach you how to get to that point. I think the instruction comes with Agile, and Agile as a project management culture, not methodology. And of course, your mentors. You got to be thinking about
Yeah.
finding community. You got to grow your business friendships. You got to stay connected. You got to get engaged. You got to have your personal board of directors. You've got to have those mentors with the NASDAQ Entrepreneur Center. Make sure you have your mentors and your mentees. You've got to encourage your team. What I like to tell people is, one of the things that Agile reminded me to do was, whenever I have a meeting with one of my mentors on the business side of the house, I always make sure I bring my team into that meeting, right? It's so important when you have those mentorship relationships to always, if you can include your team members, not even if it doesn't have to be all of them, because of time, constraints and things of that sort, or personality, sometimes it's a personality issue. Bring in one or two of your team members, right? To me, I look at them as your accountability partner. That's a person who not only you're talking in terms of delegation with, you're delegating the work, and outside of the delegation, there's also the accountability there. There's that deepening of the connection and the engagement that you're having, with your mentor, but then also, your company at large, and of course your community. That stuff matters. People take inventory of those types of interactions. So that's what I'm thinking. All of these things help to ensure success in your work.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then just, I I think you touched on this a little bit, but kind of just in thinking about values and like the philosophies of your business while you're pursuing growth and how that can present its own difficulties. Um, can you maybe offer insight into how entrepreneurs utilizing that PMO mindset can more effectively pinpoint their fundamental principles and translate them into a practical strategy that drives growth and project or business success?
I would say that you need to have multiple sounding boards. Like you need to have a team of people who are not just going to be like, yeah, that sounds great. That's awesome. I had a great example of this that happened actually yesterday, where there's a ton of growth, right? There's a ton of growth and innovation that's taking place all over, not just here in San Antonio, but like all over, literally. And very rarely do people ask the question of like, who's here? Like, who's at the table? Who is being included in the plans to bring progress and to bring investment and to bring business, right? And create work. Who's involved in creating that work? And who's at the table? Like, who's on the agenda? You know what I mean? A lot of times you see voices, especially of women, African American women. I'm not going to say women of color because I got in trouble with saying that the other day. You you see a lot of excluded voices, right? And I think that one of the things that we've noticed over time, especially with all of the businesses that we did see close recently, there was a lot of insulation that took place. There's a lot of silo thinking that took place. There's a lot of, well, why should I help you if you're not going to help me? Right. There was a lot of that's taken place that leaves a lot of folks in a position to where they're so bitter or they're inaccessible, right? They're unavailable spiritually, mentally, physically, but they're also just generally inaccessible. And that lack of accessibility, puts them in a silo that it's hard to dig you out, right? It's like a boulder that sits there. When the boulder just drops, it's easier for me like to react immediately and be like, all right, come on, let's go, let's push this, versus the boulder that's just sitting there like, all right, I'm here, I'm set, right? We see a lot of that, and it's natural that happens, but that comes out of a fear of, again, a fear of failure. It comes out of a fear of sacrifice, right? I'm scared to sacrifice something to get this. That's what collaboration looks like when we talk about sharing and building in community. That's what building in community is going to require us to do. And I cannot stress building community enough for our business owners. One thing I love about the NASDAQ Entrepreneur Center is that, we have a platform on Mentor Makers where we can not only provide events. I mean, there's all types of fireside chats and things of that sort that take place, and you can, create that event, post it on Mentor Makers, invite, the entire community. All of us will see it, to come out and support and engage and interact with you. It's also a place where if you really are looking to be a mentor or, have a mentee, it's a place for you to really do that in a structured manner. I think a lot of times people, especially when you're in business, right, and you're in business as a solopreneur, especially a lot of our solopreneurs, right? One of the issues is that you end up not really having qualified help or qualified advice, right? And so you have to be very intentional about getting yourself out there, jumping out there, making yourself available, right? Opening back up. A closed fist doesn't get a shake, right?
Yeah.
Open that fist back up, open it up. So that way you can, go and meet other people who, sure, they may not be in your industry, but they've got similar experiences where in which you could learn something from them. I tell people all the time, if you ever get to a point in your business where you feel like you cannot learn from someone else, get out.
Yeah.
Get out. You're ossified, right? The worst thing that can happen is you get ossified in your viewpoints and your opinions. That's the worst thing that can happen. You seriously have to commit 30, 40 an hour, how much time you need every day, every single day, to reading a book, reading an article, listen to podcasts, do something and try to do something that's outside of your norm, right? If you're in construction or if you're in IT, go listen to something that's in a different industry sometimes. Go read a book that has nothing to do with what you do. You never know where you're going to find inspiration. And I have a tendency, I tell people all the time too, when you're in business for yourself, you need to go and learn from different global perspectives. So go read from someone who's in Jamaica, go read from someone who's in India or Britain or Russia or Ukraine. Go read from others who are in other places, have more complicated names than yours. I got most people beat. Go and be curious, right? Because curiosity is what's really going to add to your bottom line. To be real with you, 100%. That's what's going to get you where you're trying to go. Is that constant evolution, that curiosity. That's where it's going to get you.
Love it. Awesome. All right, this has been such an amazing conversation, and I want to leave some time for live Q&A. We have some questions coming in from the audience. So I guess just to start, something you touched on earlier was kind of like the blurry line, in defining the PMO role. And so we have someone kind of wondering, the PMO role for a consultant can sometimes be blurry when working with smaller nonprofits or business. So what strategies do you have in place to ensure that as a consultant, you don't take on more than what was expected, or just, I guess, that your expectations are met or, reasonable?
This is a great question. What's really important and what's really practical is to make sure that you meet with the entire team. I tell people all the time, I know people don't like to do it, but you need to make time as a consultant to go in and develop your own relationships with everyone on that team, especially at a smaller nonprofit, right? It might only be 3 people that you absolutely have to meet. Go make the time to go meet them, right? What I like to do, especially with our smaller nonprofits, is we will divvy up the work. I make it very clear what my role and my capacity is. Everything else is what the staff does. So that's why I tell people, we have consultants. We have clients where they have 3 or 4 grant writers on staff already, right? We're not there to compete with the grant writer. Matter of fact, we're there to help them get in front of more opportunity and take a break when they need it. Sometimes you have a reduced workforce, right? You might have a grant writer on staff that's fantastic at specifically going after grants that are with the NSF, right? National Science Foundation. He or she may not, or they may not have the bandwidth to also tackle, the CDC, Center for Disease Control, right? They could do it. You could easily make the argument that they could transfer those skills easily to CDC types of grants, but they may not, just in terms of fulfillment of work and in terms of their own capacity and in terms of what they want to do with that role. They may not be angling to do that. They may not be angling to add more specialties from a grant standpoint to their repertoire. They may be angling to do more management, or they may be wanting to do more public relations types of work, so you just don't want to pigeonhole people. And part of that is, and that's why we like to, work with who wants to work with you. We go in specifically understanding that the capacity that we're going to go and help or serve in is not a capacity that is going to take away or lessen the impact or the value of someone else who's already on staff, right? It's all about the symbiotic relationship. So if we're ever in a situation where it's not symbiotic, we don't even take it. We won't even work in that capacity, because that's a capacity where in which there's no trust, and there is no, again, you want to work with people who want to work with you.
Yeah. Love it. And so we have another question here. Yeah, we touched on Agile quite a bit throughout the conversation, but maybe if you could just talk a little bit more about, like, what is it about the Agile framework, or like specific techniques that make those strategies so effective when it comes to project management, and how that can potentially be applied elsewhere through entrepreneurship?
It's the art of maximizing the work not done. That is honestly the best way that I can put it. One thing that I love about Agile, and really as a mindset, as a mentality, as a culture, as a frame, is it's all about prioritizing what is going to be of most value to your client and to your team. So it's about discretion, right? It's about the healthy boundaries. It's about you figuring out what is the difference between a servant leader and a person who is actively devaluing their work or devaluing the contributions or the impact of the company that they work for, right? They're giving away too much for free. I hear that all the time. So those types of conversations, those critical conversations come into play when you think about Agile as a culture and not necessarily so much a framework, because a framework kind of is rigid. Agile is not rigid. It's very fluid and it's adaptable to the environment in which you're in. So you make it work for you versus, oh, this is prescriptive and this is how they do it at this Fortune 500, right? That's what I like about it. You can navigate those times where you need to muddle through. Sometimes the projects that you're working on are not going to be Agile projects. They're going to be traditional waterfall projects because they've got a tight budget. The client that you're working with, you may trust them. They may want to be someone that you like to work with, but they've got some real serious pressures and they have some reporting requirements that require them to have a traditional project because they have certain benchmarks and certain milestones that need to be met at a specific time. They've got types, contract types that they cannot negotiate. They have to have a firm fixed price contract type, and that's it, right? So in those types of projects, you apply the traditional, project management framework, and you might employ Kanban, or you might consider Scrum. We always have an opportunity to sort of mix and match what works best for us. But having an Agile culture or an Agile mindset is always going to be, omnipresent, sort of, depending, no matter what type of project it is that you're really, managing at your company or with your team.
Yeah, awesome. Well, LaJuana, this has been such an incredible conversation, and we covered a lot. But if you had just one key takeaway or piece of wisdom that you wanted to leave with the entrepreneurs in the audience today, what would that be?
My golden nugget is normalize struggle, because without it, there is no learning. Normalize collaboration over competitiveness. There is no me without you.
Amazing. LaJuana, it has been such a pleasure on behalf of the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center and everyone here today. We are just so, so thankful that you joined us.
Thank you so much. It was such an honor and a pleasure.
Awesome. And to our audience, we'd love for you to join us for upcoming webinars, which you can view using that upcoming events link that's going to be posted in the chat. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon.